Army of the Ukrainian National Republic. Soviet Ukrainian War, 1917 to 1921. In 1917, the Russian Empire was drawing to an end. Shaken by the political turmoil in the country and the burden of war, Russia was on its knees. At the same time, though, Ukraine, one of the largest provinces of the empire, was on the verge of fulfilling its long-lasting dream, independence. Throughout their history, Ukrainians had never been independent, as they had been ruled over by Russia, Poland, Lithuania, and Austro-Hungary. When the First World War started, Ukraine was partitioned by the Russians and Austro-Hungarians, with a larger part belonging to the Russian Empire. In February 1917, the revolutionaries overthrew the Russian monarchy and created a vacuum of power in Russia. The Ukrainians grabbed this opportunity and formed the Central Council, Rada, to proclaim the Free Ukrainian National Republic within Russia. This council acted as the government of Ukraine and was tasked with forming the governing bodies in the country and establishing control over the whole of Ukraine. Their most important tool in achieving these goals was having control of the military. The process of creating the armed forces of the Ukrainian Republic was conducted by the General Military Committee. At the time, many Ukrainians were still on active duty, fighting in the trenches on the Eastern and Caucasus fronts. The committee began raising new units by forming detachments drawn from existing Russian army units that were located in Ukraine from before the war. After signing the Brest-Litovsk Treaty with the Central Powers, the army was reinforced with returning Ukrainian prisoners of war from German and Austrian camps. The main units of the UNR Army were the 1st Ukrainian Corps and the 2nd Zaporizhian Sich Corps, accompanied by several volunteer formations. The most experienced and skillful of these units was the Galician Bukovanian Battalion of Sich Riflemen, composed of Ukrainian POWs in service with the Austro-Hungarian armed forces. In January 1918, Ukrainian regular formations were disbanded, with the country's defense relying on volunteer units and local militia only. After a series of defeats in the Soviet Ukrainian War against the Russian Bolsheviks in late 1917 and early 1918, Rada was forced to sign the Brest-Litovsk peace treaty with the Central Powers, allowing their troops to enter onto Ukraine's soil. The new government in Kyiv, the Hetmanate, tried to organize volunteers into a regular army of conscripts. As reinforcements, the Ukrainian prisoners of war from the German and Austrian camps, the Bluecoats and Greycoats, were attached to the Army of Ukraine. By November 1918, this force had 60,000 men under arms, organized into 8 corps and 4.5 cavalry divisions. However, the Central Powers had to stand down the same month, so their troops withdrew from Ukraine. They were replaced by a new government called the Directorate. After 2 years of war with the Bolsheviks and a lot of internal political turmoil, the new government had at its disposal 40,000 regulars of the Sich Riflemen and Zaporizhian Corps, with elements of the Greycoats and 100,000 guerrillas organized in a number of small units. However, in reality, the Ukrainian government could only count on its regular troops, as these partisan forces were unreliable and lacked discipline. The situation improved slightly in mid-1919 when an armistice was signed with Poland. The peace on the western borders allowed the Directorate to once again reorganize the Army of the Ukrainian National Republic. 12 full-size divisions, each of 3 infantry regiments, were mobilized and organized into 5 groups: the Sich Rifles, the Zaporizhska, the Volynyan, Udovichenko's 3rd Iron Rifles, and Adamantia Tulnets Group. In 1919, they were joined in a fight by the Western Ukrainian People's Republic Army, a military force with their own distinctive identity that kept them different from the UNR Army. A series of defeats in the summer and autumn of 1919, combined with internal clashes with the Western Ukrainian troops, plus an outbreak of typhus, decimated the UNR army. Because of this, the Directorate switched from regular military operations to irregular warfare. As a result, the UNR had no more than 6,000 soldiers during the first winter campaign. There was one last attempt to reorganize the army in May 1920 by forming 6 divisions, each having 3 brigades plus a cavalry regiment. As a result, the strength of the UNR army by the end of the year, when the Poles and Bolsheviks signed a truce, was 23,000 men, 8,000 horses, 675 machine guns, 74 artillery guns, 2 armored trains, and 3 aircraft. There wasn't much this army could do as, at the time, the Red Army dominated all of Ukraine. Throughout the 4 years of its existence, the Ukrainian National Republic had struggled to maintain a regular armed force. There was always a lack of resources to arm and equip the men in the army. A good indication of the state of the armed forces was that UNR soldiers even continued to wear the old Russian Tsarist uniforms because they had none of their own. This uniform was practically the same as when they served the Russian emperor and consisted of a tunic, breeches, knee-high boots, and peaked cap. The color of the uniform was a khaki olive-green shade. Privates wore a particular type of shirt tunic, the so-called Zimnya Storka. The tunic was based on a traditional Russian peasant shirt with a standing collar and a front fastening. Some versions had 2 breast pockets. The Zimnya Storka was worn loosely over the breeches and was made in 2 different materials, cotton for the summer and wool for the winter. In cold weather, soldiers would also wear the greatcoat, the shinel, and a woolen cap. The uniform was worn with standard Russian brown leather webbing equipment. What distinguished them from the Russian uniforms were arm patches and shoulder straps in blue and yellow, Ukrainian national colors. On several occasions, Ukrainians tried to abolish the Gemna and the Tsarist uniform, but because of the lack of resources, the old garment remained widely used until the end of the war. Cossack and volunteer units didn't wear the standard uniforms. Instead, they were dressed in traditional clothing, especially the Cossacks, who wanted to retain their distinctive appearance. The most recognizable uniform was that of the Bluecoats, who wore blue zupons, which were long robe-like coats, together with the blue baggy breeches, black Cossack boots, and gray and blue fur caps. The Greycoats had a shorter zupon, standard breeches with puttees, and peaked caps. In April 1919, a new uniform was introduced consisting of knee-high boots, khaki breeches, a tunic, and a peaked cap with a cloth chin strap. The tunic was completely different from the Gimnasturka. It was an English-style tunic with 4 patch pockets and a vertical band on both sides of the chest. On the left arm, a distinctive trident chevron was worn in different colors for each arm of service. The trident, the national symbol of Ukraine, was also introduced on the metal cap cockade on a blue disc with a gold outer edging. The leather belt, straps, and ammunition pouches remained the same, though. As part of the Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War, the Army of the UNR received substantial military aid from the Western Allies that, among other things, included uniforms. In 1920, many Ukrainian soldiers were issued with a variety of Polish, German, Italian, US, and British uniforms. During the period of the Hetmanate, and especially during the Polish-Soviet War, batches of German, British, and French weapons also appeared on the battlefields across Ukraine. However, most UNR soldiers were armed with the Russian M1891 Mosin-Nagant rifle. This excellent weapon was a bolt-action, 5-shot, magazine-fed military rifle chambered for a 7.62 by 54mm cartridge. It was precise, reliable, and above all, a durable weapon, especially in the harsh weather conditions of Eastern Europe. It was probably for this reason why Ukrainian soldiers stuck to the Mosin-Nagants throughout the entire war. Other weapons used from the Tsarist period were the Nagant M1895 revolver and Maxim's machine gun model 1910. The Ukrainian military leaders struggled to establish a well-organized armed force for a long time. Most of the soldiers in the UNR were poorly trained and lacked discipline and motivation. The dedication and bravery of the Cossacks and volunteer units were the only things that kept the Ukrainian fighting spirit alive. The appointment of Simon Petlura as commander-in-chief of the army in early 1919 greatly improved the situation. An alliance with the Galician army helped the UNR win a number of significant victories against the Red Army. Unfortunately, the Ukrainian forces were overstretched and fighting on more than one front, and an outbreak of typhus also quickly spread, finally leading to the total collapse of the army. The last 2 campaigns fought by soldiers of the UNR were the first winter campaign from December 1919 until May 1920, and the second winter campaign in November of 1921, in which they were forced to withdraw from Polish-governed Galicia, where its soldiers were disarmed and put into internment camps. This was the end of the Ukrainian National Republic's army.